All right. So today is going to be the beginning of our social sciences unit, which I'm really excited about because I've been both doing humanities and social sciences research for a while. But I think that between the two of them, the social sciences is a really good kind of discipline for beginning to understand how to write research papers. That's how I started learning to write them. And so I'm very kind of excited to be working on that with y'all for this unit. So to kind of just talk about like the social sciences as a discipline, the values of researchers in the discipline, in the same way that like humanities researchers are interested in looking at human experience, which is more on like a kind of individual level, then social science researchers are interested in understanding more of the kind of like social structure that organizes the world. And so for the film analysis, you're kind of thinking a little bit more about like the way that a text operates and the way that it's meant to be received by a viewer. And in this case, for the social sciences, it's very similar, but you're taking a somewhat different kind of approach to understanding the way that like people have messages relayed to them. So like there's a lot of like similarities between the film analysis and what you'll be working on for this project, in that you're thinking about the meanings of text and how meaning or arguments are kind of conveyed to viewers or listeners of a text. But we're going to take a different kind of like methodological approach, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means. There are a lot of different kind of fields that are within the social sciences. So sociology, anthropology, communication studies, political science, these kinds of things. I came into it from a linguistic background. That's what I got my master's in. And so that's where a lot of my kind of social sciences education came from, whereas my degree in rhetoric is more so where I learned about humanities methods. So I've kind of got my foot in two different disciplinary areas here. But like I said, just like how in the humanities, there are different kinds of theories and methodologies, like a rhetorical analysis or a literary or film analysis. When it comes to, apologies if you can hear that, my cat is eating a box in the background. But just in the same way that there are like different theories and methodologies, there are lots of different theories and methodologies that you can draw on in the social sciences. Sometimes there's even overlap. It just kind of depends. But one of the things that is somewhat distinct about the social sciences as opposed to the humanities is that there's more like quantitative research. You will see people using like statistical methods and things like that, as well as qualitative research, which looks a little bit more like the rhetorical analysis that you did, that you've done earlier in the semester. And so for this project, we're going to be focusing on linguistic and social interaction because you will be doing a discourse analysis. And discourse analysis basically just refers to like qualitative methods, and it can include some quantitative methods. We'll look at that too, that explore how language is being used within a social and cultural context. So discourse in this context just refers to any kind of communication. You often will hear it talked about in kind of general everyday terms, as though discourse is like in the same way that people talk about like, oh, political rhetoric, right? Whereas within the humanities, we understand rhetoric to actually just have to do with like all kinds of communication. Similarly here, people talk about discourse as being like about like an argument or disagreement that's taking place often in online spaces. But actually linguists and social science researchers understand discourse to very similarly to rhetoric, refer broadly to just communication that's happening out in the world. And so for this project, a discourse analysis has some kind of analog to a rhetorical analysis, but it's somewhat differently framed, again, because you're taking that social sciences perspective. And so you'll look at like the linguistic content of what's said, looking for patterns in language and how it's used, and then seeing how that's used to convey meaning for a particular audience in a particular social setting, a cultural or historical context, and so on and so forth. And so like There are different kinds of ways to approach discourse analysis, but very broadly, some kinds of things that we often see discourse analyst researchers think about is like, how is language being used to construct identity, like a person's identity and the way they present themselves in different contexts? How can it be used to negotiate or influence power? How does it kind of create and maintain reality? Right? So like thinking about, for that last one, for example, we could think about universities and institutions, right? So if we think about like these second and third questions, they could be very closely tied together. So think about like you have to submit a personal statement, right? Because when you open up the admissions application, right, somebody has written, oh, here are all the things you have to submit. You might want to submit a resume. You've got to submit your GPA. You might have to submit ACT or SAT scores, right? And so in creating that form and the specific kinds of language choices that are made made within that form by whoever has made it, right, that changes the reality of what you have to do in order to be able to successfully submit an application to that university. And so this is the kind of thing that discourse analysts are really interested in, is like who's making those kinds of linguistic choices, who has the power to say, okay, this is what goes into this form, and here's the way that people have to fill it out. And what seems like very mundane and kind of everyday to us, when you start to look at it, through this lens, you start to see kind of a connection between like larger institutions and then like a minute linguistic choices that people are making in their day-to-day lives. So project 4 is going to be all about thinking through discourse analysis, and it's going to have 2 parts to it. You're going to have an actual research paper that you're writing, and then a research poster that will go along with it. And again, we'll kind of walk through how you're creating both of these texts over the course of the next few weeks, but they are meant to go together. The reason that I have you working on a research poster is because very often when people write a research paper or study, they will attend like a conference or a poster session to then present their findings. And often they will present them either in the form of like a slideshow presentation and a talk that's associated with that, or in this case, a research poster. And it's a really important genre to kind of learn about. At NC State, you can, like I've presented at the Graduate Research Symposium. So research studies that I have worked on, I've made a poster version of that to present there. And there are also undergraduate research symposiums. And so if you work on a study within your department, then be on the lookout for like emails, or you can reach out to faculty in your department to see if they would be supportive of nominating you to present that research, which is a really good way to get your work out there, to build your resume or your CV and things like that. And so this is just a good genre to kind of get some familiarity with. So the audience then, typically for this kind of text, right, a research paper and a poster, you're going to be directing your research toward other people who are in the same kind of disciplinary field as you. So in this case, you will be directing your writing toward other academics within social sciences, so people who are anthropologists, sociologists, psychologists, linguists, who are interested in learning more about the linguistic choices of the discourse community or the speaker that you are looking at. So you'll also be drawing on scholarly articles that come from the social sciences. We'll be sticking again with APA formatting, and then I have the due date right here. And so in terms of choosing the text that you are going to analyze, the speech that you are going to analyze the discourse of, there is a website here called the American Rhetoric Online Speech Bank. And there are tons and tons and tons of different speeches here. I am pretty open to which speeches you choose, except I'm going to say no to the I Have a Dream speech. That one is just like a very canonical in a very well-known speech. And so we'll use that for examples instead in class, but I'd like for you to pick something just a little bit different. Ideally, maybe something that you haven't heard before or want to get a new look at. And so you can see that there are lots and lots and lots of different speakers here, often politicians. You can go really wherever it kind of interests you, whether you want to look at speeches of international leaders, American presidents and politicians, you could certainly look there. They have a nice link here for the top 100 speeches. I'm not sure how they do the ranking, but presumably these would be like very kind of well known. So you could look at top 100 by rank. And of course, you'll see the I Have a Dream speech up there. But there's lots and lots of other things that are here. So there's like Ronald Reagan's response to the Challenger disaster. LBJ's We Shall Overcome speech. We've got Douglas MacArthur's farewell address to Congress. There's lots and lots of speeches that you could choose here. So by all means, choose one that you're interested in because you're going to be working with it quite a lot over the next few weeks. So funnily enough, even though the social sciences is distinct from like a discipline like within the natural sciences like chemistry or physics, we do often actually follow a very similar kind of paper structure with that IMRAD formatting. So in this case, for this paper, you're going to write an introduction, a literature review, a method section, a results / discussion section. You can put them together here or break them out into two if you would like, and we can talk about what that might look like, and then a conclusion. We'll come back to this, and then we have the research poster component, and I'm working on making sure that the poster template will be the correct size for the visualization lab. As I mentioned, we'll be presenting these at the Simon Rubin I don't know what they call it, the Simon Rubin Visualization Gallery. It's like a super long name, but we'll be presenting your work there at the end of the semester. So I have some resources here. But in terms of thinking about like how you're actually going to structure the paper, again, we're going to have that kind of like IMRAD formatting if the page ever loads. There we go. And basically, in the same way that like you think about the scientific method and the IMRAD formatting as like mirroring the posing a hypothesis and then having an experiment and then getting the results of that experiment and seeing in what ways it does or doesn't answer the hypothesis and then going on from there. This is kind of the IMRAD formatting for social sciences papers. It's similarly framed around a research question. It's not quite the same as like a hypothesis in that you're not exactly saying, oh, I think X, Y, or Z will happen. I will say, I think that you have a little bit more room here is to say like, okay, how is the speaker in this speech using discursive strategies, patterns, and linguistic use to achieve a particular communicative goal? So if we are thinking about the MLK speech, for example, the research question here could be like, what kinds of discursive features was MLK using in order to kind of persuade his audience about the importance of enacting civil rights legislation, right? And so you're going to be thinking about like, what are those discursive or linguistic features that they're going to draw on? How are they using them to persuade the audience, to inform them, to entertain them? And why are they doing this? What are their purposes or goals? And so you can kind of see how there are some connections back to ideas from rhetorical analysis, right? Where we're still thinking about audience, we're still thinking about the speaker and their goals and genres and things like that. But we're kind of framing the way that we look at that in a somewhat different way. And that's part of why I really like looking at both rhetorical and discourse analysis, because it really gives you a sense of like just how much different disciplines can have in common while still approaching their research in very, very different ways. And so that's something we'll be kind of working through for this project. If you are wondering to yourself, oh, how am I supposed to know discursive strategies? We are going to cover them in the next week or so, and I'll give you examples that were similar to giving you examples for how to think about rhetorical strategies, whether that has to do with very general rhetorical strategies, like thinking about ethos, pathos, and logos, or language structure and reference, or for like rhetorical features that are specific to a particular kind of text, like a film, and its use of like camera angles and lighting. We're going to look at examples of discursive strategies that you can identify and then analyze in these speeches. And so in terms of like the way you set up your study, you're going to have an introduction and a literature review. And the introduction for this paper will be fairly similar to what you've done earlier this semester, in that you're just laying out the context for the research study, and kind of introducing the readers to the basics of what you're going to be covering in the rest of the paper. You're going to pose a research question, which in this case will basically operate as your thesis statement to say, this is what I'm going to be looking for and looking to answer in the study. And then you're going to have a literature review, and we'll talk about this more, but it will kind of lay out how other scholarship that has to do with discourse analysis, or also looks at the same speech that you're looking at, how that kind of serves as a good jumping off point for your study. Then you're going to have a method section. And this is where you're going to explain how you analyze the speech. So discourse analysis is a particular kind of method for analysis. And so you will talk about like which discursive strategies you're looking at and why you chose them and how you were keeping track of the way that those strategies are used across the speech. And again, for each section of this, we're going to be walking through like how do you approach this component of the research project stage, and how do you write that up in your research paper. You're going to have a results section, and this is where you will present your findings, basically. So if your method says, okay, I'm going to look at this particular discourse strategy, the results section will show how often that happens, right? We'll look at things like data visualizations, very basic stuff, like I'm talking like Google Sheets charts and things like that. And then you will analyze what those results are. So if one rhetorical strategy, or not rhetorical strategy, a discursive strategy, because you can see they are similar in many ways or tied together. But you will look at how, if you have like a discursive strategy that happens a whole lot, and then another one that doesn't happen much at all, the discussion section is where you start to dig into, well, why is this happening a lot? And how is this strategy being used to accomplish X, Y, or Z? And how does that tie back to the research question? It is okay if this feels a little open-ended and up in the air for now, because this is a very different kind of genre. And while there are some analogs to rhetorical analysis, we will be spending time over the next few weeks breaking down each of these sections and thinking about how to approach them. So it's okay if right now you're thinking, I don't know how I'm going to write a method section. That's all right. We're going to be doing some readings over the course of the next few weeks to get you kind of comfortable with how to write this too. Because what I will tell you is that when I came into the master's program, meaning that I already had my associate degrees and I already had my undergraduate degree, I got accepted into this program, and it was my first time really operating within the social sciences. And I thought a research paper at that time meant, oh, I just have lots and lots of sources, right? And I'm drawing on it, and I had to research and find these sources, and that makes it a research paper, right? Not necessarily. And very often when it comes to the social sciences and somebody says, like an instructor says, I want you to write a research paper, right? This is what they're asking for. This is true of like the natural sciences as well. Like this is what they want. Very often it's like an IMRAD style paper. So it is okay if you're kind of feeling a little bit like uncertain as you're looking ahead at what we're going to be doing in the next few weeks. That's quite all right. I got into a master's program and I got asked in my first semester to write a research paper. And I was like, I don't know what that is. Like, I don't know what you're asking me to do. So we're going to get through it together. And at this point, I've been doing this kind of research for a few years. And so we will walk through it together. So with that said, I have a pull quote here from the reading that you're going to be doing today that says, the method section has to be evolved to the point where in order for results to be credible, the methods of collection, reduction, and analysis, as in, oh my goodness, did you just turn something off? My cat is like going crazy. The methods of data collection, reduction, and analysis need to be highly explicit. And further, the methods need to be clearly aligned with the framing theory and the rendering of the results. And for the writer, the method section can serve as the point of origin for the ways in which the other sections of the manuscript find their thrust and organization. It is quite all right if you don't understand all of this. This is a paper that I read within my first year of the master's program, and it really helped me understand as I was working on writing my research papers for the first time, how these sections all have to relate to each other. And so essentially what he's saying is that your method section is where you're explaining how you're going to conduct your experiment, and it needs to be related to every other section of your paper, right? You need to explain how the process for data collection and an analysis is going to answer the research question, right? You need to explain how your results come from the way that you collect and analyze this data. Then you need to analyze those results so that they tie back and help answer your research question. And so for your perusal assignment today, again, it is okay if you don't fully understand everything that Smagransky is talking about here. This is like a paper that I read as a graduate student, but I want to assign it to you because I think overall the way that he talks about how important it is to understand how each stage of the research process is related and how the way that you write about that in a research paper needs to reflect that process is really important. So my cat's like sitting on my mouse. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out and let me know, but just know that we're going to be kind of walking through all of this stuff in the next couple of weeks too. Okay. I personally think that these kinds of papers are really fun because they have a very specific kind of structure to them in the same way that we thought about like the meal plan. And so it's nice to have a guide to follow along with. But it's also nice because you're thinking about actually doing research and working through research stages at the same time that you're writing, which I actually find to be really, really enjoyable. So with that said, reach out to me if you need anything or have any questions. And otherwise, I will see you at our next in-person class.